Literature and her sister's arts is driven by the secret desire to close the gap between myself and that beauty out there, to get that into me, to make beauty not something I simply gaze on, but something I feel palpably, sensuously, tangibly. Something that is weighty and heavy and embodied and feels slow and spacious and still and suspended. Hello friends, and welcome to my channel. My name is Haley and I am a Christian wife, homeschooling mother of 3, out to redeem my very own literary education. And a book like this is so perfect for me in that particular pursuit. And this book is called Why Literature Still Matters by Dr. Jason M. Baxter, who is also the author of The Medieval Mind of C.S. Lewis. I read that book last year and absolutely loved it. So I was really excited when he announced alongside the Literary Life podcast and House of Humane Letters that he would be writing a book for their brand new publishing house, Cassiodorus Press. I am so excited to talk about the ideas that he presented in this book. So in Why Literature Still Matters, Dr. Baxter is making a case for not only the importance of literature, but also for the importance of its sister arts. So that's also music and art and poetry. And the way he structured this book was incredibly interesting. So what he would do would be to compare sort of a modern version of literature or poetry or art and music and place it next to something classical. And he did create a specific Substack that he talks about in here where you can go and actually click the links to hear the music and the art so that you can kind of see what he's talking about, since the pictures aren't included in this book. But I love that he did that because it's true. There's something about our modern world that feels very fast-paced, very plain. It's like the soul has been completely sucked out of the arts, of reading, of poetry, of music, of actual art, visual art, and sculpture and architecture. And I just can't help, as someone who has become a reader, to really long for these things. And so by making those side-by-side comparisons, you can really see the vast difference, and it's really kind of startling and heartbreaking. Particularly in one of the opening chapters, he compares Mark Zuckerberg's, the owner, creator of Facebook, his letter to his daughter versus a poem written by W.B. Yeats called A Prayer for My Daughter. These two are so vastly different. When you read that letter by Mark Zuckerberg, it just feels very bland and cold. He kind of talks about how you really can't place your finger on what it is about the letter that feels off. But he's right. And really it's because in that letter, Mark Zuckerberg is talking about the productivity that his daughter will bring into the world. But he also just uses these very bland phrases about parenting that are so cliche that everyone has heard them before. So it doesn't feel like there's any soul behind it. But then you read A Prayer for My Daughter, written by W.B. Yeats, who is really comparing what his daughter's going to walk through in life to tangible things in nature that we know of and that we have seen before or experienced, and it's just a completely different thing. Another thing that he compares is a classical piece of music to a more modern piece of music written by Rihanna that uses a very repetitive word and just doesn't really seem that interesting when you dive into it, but it sounds kind of addictive to the ear. This is something that my husband and I have talked about, and so it was really interesting to see someone articulate that well. Something else that he compared was a classical piece of art to a more modern artist who kind of went away from that classical style and created the kind of comic book style of dot art, very fast-paced, driving cars, kapow, bam, the loud sounds. It just, when I looked at the art piece that he was talking about on his Substack, it was just that classic like comic book art that became incredibly popular, but it's just not the same. All of these lines and dots just don't have the same emotion as that blending of paint that really classical artists have. And it's sad. You kind of see this slow decline of beauty in our world, and it's really disheartening. And another way that he illustrates this point is with some places that he visits. So he kind of takes some of his traveling journeys and what he experienced in those and uses those to show you what it means to experience beauty and nature and what that does to your soul versus this very cold world that we're starting to live in that doesn't have much love in it, and we wonder why. One of his very ending chapters talks about the selfie, and it's very interesting because when we take selfies or look at people's selfies, you're kind of focused on the person and not the beauty that's behind them. These people are just kind of curating experiences in the currency of likes, which is a phrase that he uses in this book. And it's just kind of cold and disheartening, and it's like the people themselves really can't even enjoy it. And he talked about an experience where he witnessed a woman walk up to a beautiful waterfall or something, and she takes a selfie, looks at it, her face kind of goes dead cold after she smiles for the selfie, and then walks away. She didn't even turn around and look at the beautiful waterfall and experience it. She just wanted to share it on social media. And what is this doing to our souls? And he had an interesting thought on this that reminded me of another book that I read last year. He says, what would happen if machine metaphors got into our imaginations so deeply that we forgot they were there, and thus, without us even knowing it, we began to think and feel about ourselves and our lives and our goals as if we were machines or work functions too? And this is so true because we talk about ourselves in terms of our productivity and efficiency, and we're gonna download this and you need to give me time to process that. The language we're using is very machine-like, and it's not very humanizing, and it's not very beautiful, and it's making us feel very anxious and very fast-paced. Now, the book I read last year that reminded me of that particular idea was You Are a Tree, written by Joy Marie Clarkson. You are a tree and other metaphors to nourish life, thought, and prayer. And she talks about that at the beginning of her book, kind of how we talk about ourselves as machines. And so she wrote a book to combat that and offers some really life-giving metaphors for you to think on. Very, very beautiful. I have done a review of this book on my channel, but I thought it was just kind of a great addition to this topic of conversation. But this book was so great in being able to help articulate why literature still matters, to be able to articulate why I am pursuing this journey in redeeming my literary education and reading classic literature that's very hard. I personally do not have a degree in English or literature or any type of classical arts. I majored in agriculture and worked in crop insurance, but now I'm a stay-at-home homeschooling mother who is reading Dante and Paradise Lost by John Milton and Greek mythology and Charles Dickens and Jane Austen, and just breathing life into my soul. And to what end? Because it is kind of challenging, especially when you come out of a public school education and not a very literary life or background, maybe just a very basic one, and then diving head on into this. I mean, there must be something to it, right? Or I wouldn't be doing it, and it wouldn't be as fun, and I wouldn't be trying to educate my children in a Charlotte Mason or even a classical way to make sure they never have to redeem their literary education. There's a reason why literature still matters, and one thing he says I really think sums it up. We're reading to close the gap between the beauty out there and who I am in here. So stories really immerse us into landscapes. He kind of talks about C.S. Lewis and his idea that literature is kind of like a landscape. And literature is incredibly immersive, and it puts us around natural beauty that we can see and feel in our heads and in our hearts. And it gives us a really beautiful language to be able to process the world and the truth and things that go on. And that is so true. Jesus himself taught in parables or stories. It would have been one thing for Jesus to say, God will love you and welcome you back into his arms no matter what you have done, which is one thing, and yes, that's very nice, but it's another completely different thing when he tells you the story of the prodigal son. There's something about story and about real beauty and music and art and nature that gets into our souls and make us think, oh, yes, it just helps make life make sense. And it puts words to that and feelings to that. There was so much that I loved about this book. It's incredibly short, really. It's only 77 pages long, and I read it in just a very few reading sessions. I probably could have read it in a day if it weren't for being a mother to 3 small children. Alas, that is just the way that it is for your literary life when you have littles. But I read this very quickly. I think it's got 5 chapters, but it's very fascinating. It is a little bit scholarly and academic, so there were a couple of words or things in there that kind of just flew over my head because I don't have an education background in literature or English, but it was fine. This was not so over my head that I couldn't really enjoy the ideas that he was saying. So I love this. This gives me words to really be able to articulate why I'm reading these classic books so much and why I'm homeschooling my children in a Charlotte Mason way specifically. But I enjoyed this book so much. It actually really humbled me in a particular area of my reading because he also talked about the idea that we are moving so fast in this world that we're losing the ability to slowly be able to enjoy beauty. We're losing our slowness, so to speak. And in my TBR for the month, I talked about reading Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, a book I've been working on since February, and I talked about just being ready to get through it because it's taking me so long to read it. And this book really humbled me. There is a reason why I'm struggling to read Anna Karenina in a fast-paced way. It's actually a really easy classic to read. This particular Everyman's Library translation really reads like a modern book, but the pace of the story is slow and thoughtful and emotional, and it's not really a book that you're necessarily meant to binge. And that's what I've been trying to do, and Why Literature Still Matters convicted me that that's perhaps not the best way to approach Anna Karenina. So instead of trying to get through this quickly like I talked about in my TBR video, I'm going to go back to reading it slowly because the fast-paced way just isn't working out. It's not the way that literature is meant to be read and experienced. And I think sometimes being on BookTube or Goodreads or Bookstagram makes you feel rushed, like you really have to read big books quickly, you have to read a lot of books, and honestly, no one is really actually putting that pressure on you. I really want this channel to be a place of expression of my reading, not a place of work. Reading is supposed to be fun. Literature matters because it's slow and soulful and beautiful, and I don't want to start deviating from that. And so this book was incredible. In a lot of reviews, it was referenced to be similar to The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis, which was C.S. Lewis's book, his thoughts kind of on education and how education in his day was trying to get children to think analytically, logically, critically about everything, and it just really missed the point of educating the heart, educating virtue and morality, something that stories do incredibly well, something that art and music awakens in the soul. And I agree with that. I do think that this book did kind of echo some of the ideas of C.S. Lewis. He does talk about C.S. Lewis and some of his thoughts in here as well, but this was a much more modern take that I think if you're a modern person who loves literature, you will really resonate with. So I loved this book. There is a Literary Life podcast episode where they did interview Dr. Jason Baxter about this book. I will also leave that link in the description below so you can go and check it out. I really hope that you do pick it up. It's so great if you consider yourself a literary person at all. And I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below once you do. So Lord willing, I will see y'all next time. Happy reading, friends!